Tonight on the Your Life Matters Show podcast.
Yeah. It was September 9th, 2020, and it was about 6:35 in the morning, and it was my wife's 40th birthday. And unbeknownst to me, I had gotten her a surprise gift, and that was 57 federal agents from every agency known to man kicking in my door and arresting me for, being involved in gambling and bookmaking and everything else that I did.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and joining us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis.
Addiction doesn't start with money. It starts with pain. For some, gambling begins as entertainment. But for others, it becomes a desperate escape from stress, anxiety, and emotional wounds. And when the addiction grows stronger, the world around you becomes smaller. The choices become riskier, the consequences unavoidable. In 2022, our guest today, Jeff, reached that breaking point. A severe gambling addiction drove him down a path of financial crimes and ultimately to federal prison. But this is not a story of shame. It is a story of accountability, courage, and redemption. Today, Jeff uses his past to help others find a different future. As a gambling counselor, he is turning pain into purpose and proving that recovery is not just possible, it is powerful. Addiction, consequence, forgiveness, hope. On today's episode, we explore the psychological spiral behind gambling addiction, the emotional cost of crossing the line, and the strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ground up. This is the Your Life Matters Show podcast.
Well, howdy, and Happy New Year's to everyone. We welcome you back to the 2026 edition of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. I'm Steve Hodgson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and New Year's baby, psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Well, Happy New Year, Dr. Davis. And,
likewise.
I think this year we're going to, I think we said towards the end of last year, we're going to change the format just slightly. We're going to try to bring on some more interesting guests.
Absolutely.
And today is no exception. We're going to start off the New Year's shows with a bang with Jeff on today. So, folks, I want you to sit back. You're going to hear us cover some topics that we've covered before, but we're going to touch very briefly on it just to bring you up to date, with what we're talking about. And then we're going to bring you guests that have some very intriguing stories. And some of them I don't think get more intriguing than the guests that we have on today. We're very fortunate with that. So before we begin the show, I'd like to ask you to take 2 minutes and watch this message from a company that's very dear to this show and even to Dr. Davis, Waypost Counseling.
Let's face it, life can feel like too much at times. Stress, loss, big changes. They can leave us feeling lost. But taking the step to reach out for help, that takes real strength. That's why Waypost Counseling exists. Founded in 2020 by Dr. Eric L. Davis and licensed therapist Aaron Davis, Waypost Counseling was created to be more than a counseling office. It's a place where people are heard, supported, and given the tools to move forward. Waypost Counseling offers more than just therapy sessions. They provide individual and couples counseling, specialized help for problem gambling, and consulting services. Their team supports adults facing ADHD, grief, addiction, relationship struggles, and major transitions in life. The name Waypost captures their heart. It's a marker along the path, helping you see where you are and where you want to go. Therapy doesn't have to feel overwhelming. At Waypost Counseling, you'll find honesty, warmth, and practical solutions that create lasting change. Whether you're in Indiana or anywhere in the U.S., you can connect with them in person or online. Don't wait for the perfect moment. The first step is what matters. Visit waypostcounseling.com or call 317-762-0904 to connect with Dr. Eric Davis, or 317-659-0179 to reach Aaron Davis. Waypost Counseling is certified by the Indiana FSSA Division of Mental Health and Addiction and the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. Remember, you know that your life matters, and right now your next step matters. Make the call today.
Well, today's episode is one that hits at the intersection of two topics where we talk really a lot about on this show. One of them is mental health, and the other one is addiction. See, gambling addiction is rarely about money. It's about emotional pain, unmet needs, stress, impulse, shames, and sometimes even desperation. And for some, that desperation leads to life-altering consequences. Now, our guest today has lived that journey before. But before we bring him on, as I said, I want to talk to Dr. Davis to brush everyone up on what happens mentally and emotionally when gambling addiction begins to take over someone's life. So let's talk about the mechanics of gambling addiction if we can. Dr. Davis, from a clinical standpoint, what happens in the brain of someone struggling with gambling addiction?
So what happens with gambling addiction isn't unlike what happens with substance use disorder at all. They're both addictive disorders listed in the DSM-5. In a nutshell, what happens in the brain is there's a dopamine hit, from gambling, which affects the pleasure center of the brain. The problem is when a person has, gambling disorder, that pleasure center is not going to process that information like a quote unquote regular person. So it really is akin to a sports car where the brakes go out. And once those stress mechanisms in the pleasure center are triggered, it's very difficult to shut them off on their own.
Yeah, and gambling has all that other excitement going on around it too.
Yeah.
Whether you're at a slot machine where you see the bells, whistles, and lights, or even if you're in a casino with everything going on all around you, hear people yay that they're winning.
Uh-huh.
I mean that sensory overload. I understand that.
Yeah.
I've been in a casino, and yeah, I understand what that's all about. So why does all of that become so powerful and so destructive?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with not only the addiction or the addictive dynamics that are happening, but also, I mean, it's, the substance that gambling deals with is money, and money's fundamental to our lives, and how we live and all that. So, um, gambling basically not only will tear the relationships apart, but also will start to destroy the person financially, and gambling, like any other addictive disorder, only becomes more destructive as time goes by if left
I think
untreated.
with money, we don't, with finances, it's different if we were a total cash society and we saw that money there.
Yeah,
But it's so easy to just spend money we don't see in front of us.
yeah,
That has, put it on credit and take it from a bank account that you don't actually see it there. All that stuff really, I think it gives a false sense of, oh, I still have money there.
yeah,
And all of a sudden they wake up and say, "What do you mean my account's overdrawn?
yeah.
What's going on?" So let's talk about the emotional spiral if we can. Many people think gambling is just a bad habit, but for those that are trapped in addiction, it becomes an emotional escape. So can you explain the kinds of emotional pain and mental health struggles that often fuel that?
Oh, absolutely. In the beginning, people gamble because it's fun. It's a good time. What happens is once the financial consequences of gambling start to take root, then the person obviously is very down on their self, and there's a very high rate of, depressive disorder with problem gamblers. Um, but we see a lot of co-occurring disorders. Substance use is very common with problem gambling because they're both addictive disorders. Um, gambling provides an escape. So people can use gambling to hide from multiple things. I've even worked with gamblers whose game of choice would be like a game of skill, like poker or blackjack. And when they were dealing with trauma, in their life, they would play slot machines because that was an escape from the norm.
Mhm.
Um, so hopefully that's helpful.
You know, today's guest that we're going to have on, he crossed some legal lines to fund his addiction. We'll be talking about that very shortly. But how common is it for a gambling addiction to push someone into financial crimes? And what's going on psychologically when someone actually reaches that point?
Really, so once the debt is large enough that the person can't solve the problem on their own, they have to become resourceful. And, um, you know, basically what addiction does is it tells us that, gambling to pay off the debt that I created gambling makes logical sense, where what that's going to do is when a person with gambling disorder starts gambling again, like I said, the brakes are off of the car, and it doesn't matter a lot of times if the person walks into the casino with $10 or 10,000, it's all going to be gone by the time they leave.
So before we bring our guest on, I want to talk a little bit about shame, the
Mhm.
secrecy and silence. Why does shame make people hide their addiction instead of seeking help?
Because others don't always understand it, and a lot of times even the person afflicted with it doesn't fully understand it at the time, where um, if you think of, what I always say is, if you think of regular people, if a regular person is doing something that's causing problems, then their initial thought is, well, I need to stop doing that. And they just stop doing it, But for somebody like me, who has substance use disorder, um, that's willpower alone is not, if willpower in and of itself were enough for me, I would have never been diagnosed with substance use disorder in the first place. So that's one of the ways that we set ourselves up. But I also think that until a person understands that addiction is a disease, it's a medically diagnosed illness. We don't ask for it. It's not something we did wrong. All those things. I think that there's even self-stigma, where the person thinks, what in the world is wrong with me? It's like I, I take care of my family. I run this business. I do A, B, C, D, and when it comes to gambling, the wheels come off. Like, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But to a professional like me who treats this, it makes total sense, because I see it all the time, but most people don't.
You see, I think, a lot of times too, people, if they're going to do drugs, they know drugs leads to addiction. I mean, there's no very few good people that do drugs and just walk away and they don't have any kind of problems from it. And the same thing, but with gambling, you go into a casino, see thousands of people that are gambling,
Yeah.
and most of them they don't have a problem.
Yeah.
So you step into that situation not thinking that, okay, I'm risking something here, because you
Yeah.
really don't think about the risks. You hear the casinos say, if you got a gambling problem, blah, 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 but you really don't think, hey, I have a gambling problem,
Yeah.
because look at the other 9,900
Yeah.
people that are in
Addiction
here.
and addiction is the only illness that tells us we don't have it.
Right,
The only
exactly.
one.
Yep. So our guest today is Jeff, and we're just going to go with his name is Jeff right now.
Okay.
He's a certified peer coach recovery associate. He's dedicated to helping individuals and families who are affected by gambling addiction. Now, he currently serves as the president of the Indiana Council of Problem Gambling and is recognized as a national leader in the field of gambling recovery. Now, Jeff works with people in recovery across the country where he offers peer support, guidance, and advocacy. Now, in addition to one-on-one coaching, Jeff speaks nationally on the importance of peer recovery in addressing problem gambling. He has specialized focus on assisting those facing criminal charges or incarceration related to their gambling struggles. He collaborates with organizations nationwide where he designs and expands problem gambling programs, ensuring more tailored resources are available to those in need. And there really is a need for more resources to help in this. Now, Jeff has also played an active role in advancing responsible gaming efforts there in Indiana and to help strengthen support networks and access to care. Okay, his work reflects a deep commitment to providing hope, accountability, and practical pathways to recovery from problem gamblers at every stage of their journey. Now, I'm going to give you just a little paragraph, okay, on Jeff. Okay, in 2022, Jeff was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for bank fraud, totaling more than $736,000, money that went directly to feed a severe gambling addiction that he was suffering from. But that's not where the story ends. Jeff has rebuilt his life and he's using his journey to help others find recovery and hope. Well, Jeff, thank you for being here with us and being willing to share your story with our listeners. We truly appreciate having you here. Now, Jeff, what was happening in your life emotionally when gambling first became more than entertainment for you?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and for me that was such a young age. Growing up the way that I did, gambling. I think I learned how to gamble before I learned how to walk, talk, or even drink out of a bottle. So gambling was something that was a young age. So emotionally, I think when it became a problem, at such a young age, I don't even know if I was able to emotionally comprehend what was happening. It was just such a quick time and a way to socially interact with people, and make money. You never think about all the times you lose money, but if you walked out with a few dollars, you felt okay. So emotionally, I think it was a high and feeling a sense of being a part of something in a way that you could almost build a future. Emotionally, it was a very positive, strong connection, at a young age that gambling, was the path forward and something that I could be a part of in many different ways.
Was there a
When did you
particular
go ahead?
kind of game that you played? Was it cards? Was it machines? Or was it anything?
Yeah, I'll bet on anything, that there's no doubt about that. But for me, bookmaking and that sort of stuff was, I'd say, number one, as far as what I did. But yeah, card games, literally betting on anything. We even ran a little book in school, and when I was in high school, and had folks betting on things there. So yeah, it dealer's choice, if you will.
When when did you feel like the addiction, like when you look back over the course of everything, when do you feel like the addiction really began to take over? And um, was there a moment when you look back on as a turning point? So was there a point where things tipped, to the bad, and then another point where they seemed to tip to the good?
Yeah, that is a really great question. When I look back on it, it's hard to really have one point that says, "Oh, this was, when the addiction was there." Because early on, my mom was a gambling addict, my dad as well, and an alcoholic, and so being around it at that level, it never seemed like it was a problem. When you grow up with it, so from an addiction standpoint, it was something that was always talked about. My
Yeah.
mom would lie to people and take money and do things. And so for me, just growing up, it was just such a commonality. So I think if I look back on it now, like with the lens of where I'm at now, which is much different than when you're in the moment, I can really see those moments where I lost $5,000 in a day and we couldn't eat. My wife and I couldn't eat for, a month because of it. And I just chalked it up, to something else or a bad run or, just a mistake. But
Cost of doing business.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Those were really the moments. And I know you know this, Dr. Davis, but another thing that I look back at now is all the superstitions that I started to create. When you're in the gambling mindset, there's always a reason, oh, I watched this field goal happen. That's why he
Yeah.
missed it. So I just won't watch him. So I
Yeah.
think looking back, those superstitions, like when I can trace back why I do certain things, I think that's when I can really tell that the addiction grabbed hold, but I at in the moment had no clue you know what I mean, for
Yeah.
decades later. But looking back, yeah, I think it's those are some identifying points.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Davis, is just listening to what he said. I mean, I know alcoholism can pass from generation to generation. Is that the same for gambling?
Yeah. It's the same for any addiction is the truth, where the argument or the debate in my field is it nature or nurture? And it really it depends on what research you look at, but the what I would say the definitive answer is it's both. It's nature in that it's this condition that we're either, born with or not. And then life, nurture is what unleashes that or allows it to take hold. So it's kind of like, we're born with Pandora's box. At some point we open it. And the same thing, all the same, check marks for substance use disorder exist for gambling as well.
Because I mean, it's really what it because just from listening to what Jeff was saying, it sounds more like, yeah, I've heard so many people say, but that was normal in my house.
Mhm.
It was normal to see dad drink, or like you say, it was
Yeah.
normal. Your mom was gambling. That was something that was the norm that you grew up with.
Yeah.
So you sort of lose sight of whether or not that's something that you should be doing or not. It was something you grew up around.
Yeah.
That was normalcy for yourself.
Yeah. Part of the problem too is we don't like if the only frame of reference that I have is someone who gambles all the time, when I'm a kid, I
Hmm.
don't know different. I don't know any different. And it's only a problem once it becomes one. Like
Right.
that's the thing. Things are problems once they become one. But some problems can be so big it'll change the entire course of our life.
Well, and I
So
think that's an area, Dr. Davis, where that the nurture, like learned,
yes.
comes to effect. When I was growing up, because I had parents that gambled, and were alcoholics, they were constantly manipulating people for more time to pay something off or money, to do something.
Yeah.
And so I was just taught at a young age that it's better to lie and kick the can down the road, if you will. And when you look at gambling as an addiction and how the brain works, that is one of the worst combos, with a gambling addict,
Mhm.
is that learned as a child
Yeah.
to hide, hold in, and then try to fix. So mine really stemmed from ego with that learned behavior, and those combined, is really what impacts me the most, when I'm in that addiction spiral.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, how did gambling start? How did it begin to affect your mental health? Like stress, anxiety, sleep, your mood? I mean, what were
Yeah,
you
well,
starting to see signs of?
this is very difficult for me to talk about on this part of recovery, because it's very hard for me to tell my story without glamorizing how great it felt, to gamble. The people I was around, the things I was doing. I was also involved in sponsorship, so around athletes all the time. There was these just highs. And when you were making the money that I was making and doing what I was doing, you were more about those experiences and those highs. And so gambling became a mental block very early on, because I was like, well, yes, I'm losing this money, but all of these great things are happening. I'll make more money, or I'll just have a better day, tomorrow. And then that is when, the mental health, really switched. And I always have a difficult time explaining it, but it's like when someone has too much to drink in a night, and they wake up the next day and they have to have their friends tell them some of the things that happen. That is what that mental kind of shield, feels like when it's gambling time, and that oh, this is a great thing has gone away. I just lose track of everything that's happening around me, and then all of a sudden cut to some time duration later, and I have no recollection of half the things, that were going on, because I was just so, mentally focused. So from a mental health perspective, it's like this part of your brain just shuts down, hides you from the rest of the world. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you've just hurt 15 people. You owe all of this money. So then your mental health shifts to even worse. Now you're shameful about what you did, and then you're consumed with how to pay those people back. And then obviously that just leads back to, well, if I just get $10, that's not going to make a dent. So let me, gamble. So then you get in this mental cycle where it's hard to focus. It's hard to think about anything else other than what lies you've told, who knows what, who you owe money to, and how you're going to eat. So, from a mental health standpoint, it's a really rocky road. And I heard someone use a quip one time about if a gambling addict is, in full impact and full effect, they will literally not eat, not clothe themselves. They would spend all of their money, on gambling, which is just crazy, to think about. That food isn't even something like we won't even set aside $5. And it's a problem I have with the casinos. They know that, and so by offering free food, from gambling, it's like another wave of, well, at least I can eat tonight if I go into the casino. So from a mental health perspective, I could spend 5 hours, talking about how terrible and how those ups and downs, and yeah, the dopamine spikes, that you go through, then they just stop. When you stop gambling and you move into active
Yeah, those are
recovery.
tough dopamine spikes to compete with too,
Yeah,
you know?
it's very difficult. And then you have massive bouts of depression, when those waves don't
Mhm.
get there. So not only now do you have the mental health aspect of it, but now you've also entered into a chemical reaction into your body, that your body goes chasing for. Much like if you eat too much sugar, your body craves that. And I think that's the disconnect that folks have when they don't understand how gambling addiction works.
Mhm.
It's a very clouded mindset, and then a circle of, well, if I just do one more dollar, I can
Yeah,
take care of everybody. So it's
yeah.
it's a wild ride.
That
What?
basically that's addiction. I mean,
Yeah,
really, we've had
absolutely.
people that did drugs and stuff, and it's the same way. You just got to keep going for that high. And one high doesn't help. You got to keep going further and
Mhm.
further and keep going and going. And people, I don't think understand if they understood that you have to have that, let's say, like that next line of Coke, or you got to make that next bet. They'd understand this isn't something you could just stop. Because I think
Right.
people would say, well, just stop gambling and it's
That's
okay.
that's what I've
Or stop doing
always
drugs
said.
and it's okay. Yeah.
That's why that always cracks me up. And I know Jeff will appreciate this. It's like people were, well, then stop. And it's like, if I could stop, it wouldn't be a problem in the first place.
Yep,
It's like,
exactly.
I
the
take
very
no
the
joy, when I'm gambling. Like there is no more fun in it. It is a painful experience, and it's very hard to explain to anybody who's never even come close, to having an addiction, which is a large number of people. And I think one of the biggest issues, not only does gambling and drugs, alcohol, all of addiction really need to work on, is everybody makes slight jokes about things they're addicted to. Oh, I'm
yeah.
addicted to shopping, or I'm addicted to
Hmm.
getting my hair done.
Hmm.
And it stigmatizes what real addiction is. I cannot express to you the things that I would do to get $1 to gamble. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and it's unthinkable. It's in my right mind, it would never happen. But in those moments, it's all I can think about.
Yeah.
And that's the real problem, is people think addiction across the board is a joke, and that people can just stop, whenever they want to. And it is a very powerful thing when you're in the throes of it. Absolutely.
That's honestly a great segue into my next question, which is, um, you know, with stigma, talk about stigma a little bit and why people are so afraid to seek help publicly or to even to ask for help or tell somebody that they're struggling.
Yeah, well, I know we've talked about this, but for me, the number one thing that I have a big problem when it comes to gambling is every time I think about it, I can say if I spend this $10 on the Cubs, to win this game, I can win another $10 and I can start paying back, what I've done. And
Yeah.
so one of the reasons, and this isn't necessarily stigma based, but one of the reasons why it's so hard to ask for help in the gambling addiction world is because it's very hard for the addictive brain to not say to you, sure, you could get help, but then you're never going to solve this problem. If you just take 10 more dollars,
Hmm.
you can solve that problem and
Yeah.
pay people back. And then, you can get help. So that is one part of it, is that it's just
So
always a cycle
that's an
of
interesting point. Sorry.
catching
I
up.
didn't mean to cut you off. So
No, no,
you're
you're
saying
fine.
the debt itself is one part of because the gambler's in a situation. If let's say I've run up $20,000 in debt, if I stop gambling, how the hell am I ever gonna make that money?
A hundred
And
percent.
that's
Well, at that point too, Dr. Davis, it's usually now hit a point to where we've asked our friends, family, if we've taken a loan out or something like that. Very rarely is that when, that's rock bottom. That's just usually, the starting point. So not only is it about paying back, but it's like, hey, that's my dad, that's my brother, that's my best friend,
yeah,
and that emotion then says, well, they can't suffer because of what I've done. So let me just put another $5 down, and I can
yeah.
catch them back up.
What how do you feel like gambling addiction? Because something that we see happen a lot is where individuals will end up stealing, to try and support the gambling habit. How do you feel like how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the perfect example. It's I had spent some time being incarcerated for when my gambling got out of control. I was part of some bookmaking and some big things like that in a lot of different areas and avenues, and some people threatened to kill me and my wife, and that really snapped me into, I needed to do anything and everything to get back on track. And the thing that I want to correct you on, Dr. Davis, is at no point do we ever think that it's stealing.
Yeah.
These
Yeah,
are
thank
always
you.
investments, or, this is something that I'm going to lie about, but I'm going to take this $100, I'm going to
Yeah.
turn it into $1,000. So when I give them $200 back, they're going to be extremely excited. And I'm not saying that what I did was right or that I should be
Sure.
patted on the back, but in those moments, I never once looked at it like stealing or
Yeah.
taking. And I'm not saying, again, after the fact, I don't feel that I took and that I stole. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that's how the brain works, is
That's how we
you don't
rationalize it.
ever. Yeah, well, yes, exactly. You don't ever look at it like you're losing it. You always look at it like, well, I'm going to take this 100, turn it to 1,000, and be the hero. So that's not a problem. And that's
Yeah.
what I was talking about earlier, about that when you have too much to drink and you wake up the next day and you're trying to figure out what happened. That's really how that gambling cycle happens. It'll be a 30-day split where you just hammer it, and then you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I just took all of this. What am I going to do? And then your brain goes, well, you're in it now. So the only thing you can do is, just take a little bit more,
Hmm.
which is why it's such a difficult carousel ride.
Yeah.
See, I know myself with gambling, I don't like gambling, only for the sake that, yeah, a little bit of it can be fun, but I'm a compulsive person. And I would fall exactly as what you were saying there, where, I would say, okay, I'm going to take $300 and that's all I'm going to spend. Go down to Vegas, I'm going to spend 300. Well, when that's gone, it's like, well, you know what? If I spend 100 more, what's the big deal? I
Yeah.
know where my brain would go, so I just don't go. I mean, I've gone to Vegas, I think we talked about that, but I go to sightsee in Vegas more than, being,
Yeah.
I walk through the casino because that's how you get out of your hotel
That's
room.
that's the only way that any of us can afford to sightsee in Vegas is not gamble.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah, but I get that, and
Yeah.
it's really tough. I mean, I've also woken up like you talked about. I was drinking when I was younger, way younger than I am now, but where next day I could remember half the stuff I had done the night before, and then like my friends who I was with would call me up and say, "Steve, what was with you last night?" And it's like, "What are you talking about? You don't remember?" And it's like, well, obviously, if I'm asking you, no, I don't remember what I did last night.
I,
And then the memories start to flow back.
I'm
And
curious if, sorry, I'm curious if
yeah,
Jeff agrees with this. The way it always seemed to me in my head is it was like when the opportunity to use or place a bet or whatever was in front of me, it was like the rational thinking. It would come across the screen, so to speak, in my mind, but it was so cloudy. It was almost like, and it would be something where it's like, I know I shouldn't do this, but whatever. And it was like, and there would always be a rationale in my head that it's not that that moment never happened. It's just that the addiction um, deals with that moment in a maladaptive way and kind of suppresses the, yeah.
Yeah,
What are your
it's
thoughts on that?
yeah, no, that's a fascinating way to look at it. I always look at it like this, and I know we've talked about this. People look at addicts like myself and they're always like, man, that's someone throwing their life away, but they know how to talk, what they're saying, makes sense. Like we develop these manipulative voices that help us get whatever we need from a
Yeah,
drug, alcohol, or gambling standpoint. And what I think what you're saying and what my whole point is that people don't realize that same manipulation is what is happening inside our own brains. So
absolutely.
you as a person, when you're having your rational thoughts or you're thinking about dinner, at night, your brain fires, a particular way.
Mhm.
The same way that I am able to get $15 from someone or $1,000, in order to gamble is the same way my brain is tricking me, talking to me, and so when you have this manipulative ability, like a lot of us addicts do, that's what turns your brain against itself, is that it is just as manipulative to you as it is to everybody else. And
Yep.
so, when you talk to people and they're like, man, Jeff, when you're in your active addiction, like nobody can tell what's real, what's not, we want to give you $1 million. Like it's unbelievable. It's like, now think about me having to fight against that, same
Yeah.
ability in my own head, knowing that I know my own weaknesses, my own strengths. So my brain can steer away from those,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
push me down a map. And I was just sharing this, with my wife yesterday. We were having a conversation about something, and she did something very innocuous, very minimal. I mean, very minimal. And my brain was just like, yeah, she probably doesn't want to be around you right now, just go in another room. And
Mhm.
I had to stop and be like, boy, you are like, you're just trying to put a little push. And as an
Mhm.
addict, this never goes away. This is another thing everybody always wants to talk about is like, well, now that you're on this side, every day I think about it. Every day I think
Mhm.
about gambling. Every day it impacts my life. There is, you wouldn't be able to understand the entire checklist that I have to go through just to make sure that I can get through a day, without gambling. And those things are, what I think happens in that cycle, in that manipulation brain, and how it pushes you down there. It's just gambling is always,
Yeah.
is always that answer. So I don't know if that is exactly what you're saying about the cloudiness, but I
No,
do think
absolutely.
it's that manipulation and that murky,
Yeah.
way. And then all of a sudden you're, pushing away from your wife, you're pushing away from your friends. So now you're alone, now you're starting to get down on yourself. I know I always used to say this to you, Dr. Davis, but I would literally call myself a piece of shit 100 times a day. And that just helps. You know what I mean? Because that way, when I gamble, it would be like, well, that's what a piece of shit does.
It
So,
does, yep.
so now you're meeting expectations. Now you're in a little
Yeah.
bit of a groove. And so it's pretty murky, pretty cloudy,
Yeah.
when you're having that rational thought.
So what
Biologically,
was
the
it?
reason that that happens biologically is because our frontal cortex is where we make sound decisions. I mean, that's responsible for basically rational thought. And that is exactly that is one of the primary areas that addiction targets, in the brain. So it's kind of wild because it's the mechanisms that our brain has to defend us against it are the very things that it attacks. It's pretty amazing, honestly. It's kind of interesting. Go
So
ahead,
tell
Steve.
me,
I'm
what
sorry.
what was? Yeah, I was just gonna ask, what was the pinnacle moment where you just said, "I have to stop"?
Yeah. That
I mean, I don't know if it was legal or what, but I mean, but what was that? Walk us through that moment.
Yeah, yeah. It was September 9th, 2020, and it was about 6:35 in the morning. And it was my wife's 40th birthday. And unbeknownst to me, I had gotten her a surprise gift, and that was 57 federal agents from every agency known to man kicking in my door and arresting me for, being involved in gambling and bookmaking and everything else that I did. And so then I was arrested, taken into custody, and I spent, oh God, maybe just a week or two um, in in federal prison, in downtown Indianapolis, in a federal prison that is not segmented by population. So what I mean by that is there is no maximum, minimum, low.
Right.
Everybody is just mixed together. And yeah, I walked in and had no issues, whatsoever. It was almost, I don't want to say a relief, but it was almost like I was home. I felt very comfortable in prison. And I laid in bed and I just looked up and I was like, you got two options. Like, that's it. You know what I mean? And while I
Mhm.
was in, I just literally kept telling myself, you got two options. You can keep doing this, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
keep going down this path. Or now everything is out. Like when you get arrested by the federal government, there are no more secrets. Nothing
Right.
is sacred. And
Except for
so
them.
I just, yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I just took that opportunity. And my wife was very supportive, not supportive, but just was terrified, was trying to figure out what was going on, and gave me the number of a couple of places, and found one that actually Dr. Davis, you know what I mean, ran, and the best one, in the state of Indiana. And that's when I started, my pathway on recovery. Over just over 5 years now.
Which
I mean, I'm sure
which
your wife knew a little, some, or at least understood something was going on in your life prior to that. I mean, how did she take, I mean, that's, we can talk about how she felt, but I really want to go into more how you felt when she had to learn about everything that was going, what
you're saying
the
when all the
federal government
secrets
was laying
when all the
out. Yeah,
secrets came out. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, yeah. It's a remarkable feeling of every emotion, you could possibly think about. You come to the realization first, the very first thing that hits you is that everybody including your wife, may never speak to you again. You may never get another job because now you are,
A
I
felon,
always
right?
joke about this when I was in prison. Everybody in there, was not guilty, for what they did. And here I am. As soon as they arrested me, I was like, got me, like
Mhm.
I didn't want to hide, you know what I mean? Like I was like, you got me, like this is not who I want to become. So there was even a sense of relief,
Yeah.
once it happened. But you go through this wave of no one's going to talk to me again. I'm never going to get a job. This is never going to go away. It's a very overwhelming sensation that just, anger, depression, sadness. And for me, I can't say this for everybody, but the most difficult part of my recovery, and Dr. Davis knows this very well, the most difficult part was once I got arrested, got out, and was going through trial and all of that stuff. So now my friends were able to ask questions, my family members were, and every single one of them was, I shouldn't say all of them, a few of them, went in a different direction, but an overwhelming number of them were excited that this is what was wrong. Like, hey, this is something we can work on together, and we can get better. And that was the hardest part for me is the hugs, the open arms. I
Yeah.
had done this. And so I went through a self-punishment phase, where I kept punishing myself because I felt like it was others were just being a little too nice. So, not only was it about, hey, what's my wife going to think, but it's
Yeah.
it's everybody. You go through that wave of, yeah, my wife may never talk to me ever again. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what was going to happen. They arrest you. I was naked, when they arrested me. So they gave me clothes that barely fit, when I got to prison. Then when I got out after that first, initial session, I just got out. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have any money, couldn't call anybody. They always make it sound like, you can call people. That is not accurate whatsoever. So I got out of federal prison, and had no idea who was going to pick me up. And when I saw my wife, drive out front and pick me up and gave me a big hug, it really sunk in that there's help. There is a better way, and that not everybody's going to be happy, but I think people are going to be excited to maybe get me back and get me back, to where I was mentally, before that.
Yeah. What you didn't just rebuild your life, you've chosen to help others. So what do you feel like inspired you to become a peer recovery support specialist for problem gambling?
Yeah, so I mean, I was very successful in business, have a very level head, analyze data better than most, like it is a
I
very
was gonna say we should
rational.
use you for help with the show.
Yeah,
With some of the stuff I read, yeah.
just a hundred, just one of those, really focused in on the on the gambling side and what was happening from there. I mean, it's just a very, very difficult, process to go through, on the mental side. And I apologize, Dr. Davis, I kind of lost that question there. Can you ask it one more time?
Yeah, just what inspired you to become a peer coach?
Yeah, yeah. So what I was getting at was, when I was going through what I was going through as someone who was connected,
Hmm.
in every way possible, I couldn't ask for help, didn't know how to ask for help. When I wanted to try to find resources, they were non-existent.
Hmm.
I remember the first GA meeting that I went to, and this is another problem that exists. The number of GA meetings is, I think there's 7 or 10 in a week throughout the entire state of Indiana. I mean, just let that sink in. That's
Yeah,
it. That's all the meetings that are available throughout the entire state.
yeah,
And so I went to my first GA meeting, and when I got in there, people were talking about, betting $5 on on a blackjack table, and that was the biggest bet they ever made, and that they were losing
yeah,
$50 at a time. And I'm sitting here like, dude, I'm betting 100 grand every single game. Like I am like, this is like real money. Like these people don't know what's going
hmm,
on. So it pushed me further away, from
yep,
getting help and made me think that I was unique and nobody could understand.
yeah,
And so for me, that's kind of what inspired is that where my brain was at, if I wasn't able to find resources, if I wasn't able to get help, how is
yeah,
someone who is in a rural area or does, not have many connections, as
yeah,
far as getting help. So if I don't stand a chance, how do they? So I am now dedicating, my life to making sure resources exist, making sure help is out there, and just sharing my story. I'm not saying that I'm special, but it covers a lot of ground that I think a lot of gamblers go through when they're in
it
their
does.
worst moments. And so if it just helps someone find a nugget that they can go, I'm not alone, that's just helpful as well. So, for all of those reasons, that's what inspired me to try to make a difference, is because people need help. This isn't a fair fight. Let me be very clear. This is the most one-sided fight in the history of the world because you have advertisements now that are going out that are only focused on addictive behavior patterns. Telling someone if they bet $1, they're going to win 100 does nothing for anybody that doesn't have an addictive mindset. Not one bit. You then also
Hmm.
have casinos spending billions of dollars to figure out what the right temperature is, what oxygen levels should be, where tables should be, and how they should be faced to
Hmm.
maximize people playing and losing. So we have
Yeah,
no chance. As an addict, you have no chance at all, at this moment in time. They're coming at you from the government angle because governments now are needing to replace tax dollars, and casinos are a great way,
hmm,
to do that. And so the mental health of America is at stake with this war right here, and we don't stand a chance. I was just talking to folks in Ohio who said that it's like $4,550 is how much each person over the age of 18 gambles in a year in the state of Ohio. That
wow,
is insane to think about. I think it's around
that's a
$50
lot of
billion.
money.
dollars. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's how much they get. And now the Problem Gambling Council in there, they get funds and they're one of the better funded ones, but they're definitely not getting their fair share, you know what I mean, of a
Yeah,
dollar value that high. So we cannot compete if we have no resources. And so
yeah,
not only am I committed, but anybody who's listening that can get involved or try to
absolutely.
help out or push a resource out on their social media channel, I can assure you, you have no idea how much help you might have had to a random person that you don't even know by doing something like that.
Yeah,
Let
and
me
that's
ask you,
one.
because you brought it up here just for a second. I want to keep continuing
Yeah,
what he said about the casinos. Now, I'm not laying blame on the casinos because the casinos aren't twisting your arm and bringing you in to gamble. Though they know once they get you in the door, they know how to keep you there,
yeah,
as you just mentioned there. And they also, oh, if you have a gambling problem, seek out, Gamblers Anonymous or something like that and a phone number. But they know when I mean, they keep track of everything you do when
Mhm.
you're there. They know you're spending a lot of money. They know you're losing a lot of money.
Yeah.
Are casinos really partially to blame for what's making people do what they do?
Yeah, so Steve,
I
not to be
think so, yeah.
argumentative with you, but something that I want to point out is without question, casinos twist your arm and bring you there. And let me explain
Mhm.
why. There isn't a drug dealer in the world that says, hey, come to my house right now. I'm going to give you a couple free J's. You know what I mean? Take
Mhm.
a
Right.
couple of hits, come take your
Hmm.
socks off, kick your feet up, and I'm going to feed you the best meal that you've ever had. And then I've got some other drugs over here. If you want to buy some of them, go right ahead. I know people, from a drug perspective, alcohol, we would take advantage of that every chance we could. And that's what casinos are doing. They're giving people like myself $100 free play spin, once a week. They're telling me I can come in on bingo Tuesdays, or whatever they call it, and say, hey, you don't have to spend a single penny, but come on in, we'll give you a nice meal and take this lucky spin. And if you win something, you
Mhm.
can keep it, you can gamble with it more. That is twisting our arms because we have nothing else. We've already spent all of our money, so we don't have food. So at least now we can get a meal. We then are now triggering in our brain, I'm going to hit that free spin and I'm going to win, X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z. It is an unfair advantage that no other addiction is going through right now. There is no
Yes.
bar that says, come in here for alcoholics and you can drink for
Mhm.
free for an hour straight. And then after that, you can pay, you pay for your own drinks. You get
Yeah.
an alcoholic a couple of free drinks. I mean, just like
Yeah.
you give me a couple of free spins, I'm gonna find a way to come up with an extra $10 when I lose. I'm gonna steal or I'm gonna beg from someone.
Mhm.
And then the second point that I want to make, Steve, that you had asked about is those patterns that these casinos are looking at. Do you know how easy it is to identify me? I
Oh,
am
I
the
know.
easiest person to identify in the world. You can see how many times I ask for free plays in a day, how many times I ask for freebies, referral credits. Can I cash this in? Just my customer service strings of talking to people alone should be able for them to identify and go, this guy's a problem gambler and
Mhm.
we need to push him away. And they just don't do it. And
It's
it's so
money.
that's why I say they do bear a lion's share of the responsibility because they could identify me in a matter of seconds and just keep me out of their casinos without, question. And even the self-exclusion process, while it's getting better, I mean, there are still some states that you have to physically go into a casino,
Yeah.
ask for a self-inclusion letter, sit down next to all of the machines that you're addicted to, and fill out a form that says, I'm never going to come back here again.
Yeah.
And I bet you at times they'll even give you some sort of a, hey, thanks for doing that. Why don't you go have a free meal, on your
Mhm.
way out? And just give you one more thing to say, hey, we love you. We're a nice warm hug. Don't forget about us, even though you just signed this self-exclusion.
Mhm.
I mean, I
Good
remember
point.
when I went when I was, I guess, about 21 years old. I went with a couple of people I worked for in a bank. We went cross country. We drove cross country, and I remember when we got to Vegas. Um, people in the casino a little bit, and then they went upstairs and went to sleep. And I remember sitting at the slots probably about 10 hours, okay, at slot machines. And of course, you had a really beautiful looking, waitress that was coming around that would sit and flirt with you and talk to you. And she was bringing you drink after drink after drink for free. This is back in
Right.
the days when Vegas,
Mhm.
and no windows, no clocks in a casino. I mean, I don't need to tell you, but at least to our listeners,
Mhm.
after a while, you forget how long you've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate that day that I walked away with like $500 profit, and I looked at it and paid for my entire trip that I went. But then, on retrospect, weeks after that, it started to sink into this brain that I have. Whoa, boy, was I caught! They got you in the door and caught you in that cycle. And you just even my cousin, may rest in peace, passed away recently. Uh, he used to go to Atlantic City all the time. I mean, he multi-billionaire. He owned a number of pharmacies, but he used to get all the big suites for free.
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
comped almost all his meals and everything else because he thought nothing of spending 50 to 100,000 bucks when he
Yeah.
was there, and they did all the time. He was one of their high rollers, I guess you
Yeah.
call it, and you know what that's like, and everything you want is there. Your
Yeah.
room, everything. It's all set up for you there. And that's why I say I think, casinos, yeah, I get from business point of view, I get they need to make money, but they need to responsibly make money too. And I
Yeah,
don't
well,
think they're really very responsible in it.
Well, the issue that I have is you're absolutely right. They're a business, they make money, and in some instances, their tax dollars can go to a lot of good,
Right.
so they don't need to be the big bad wolf. But the problem is, much like with tobacco, this is always such a great use. You had tobacco, and then it was like, okay, this is bad, like this is hurting
Mhm.
people. So then you had tobacco create their tobacco institutes, that they funded with their studies. And then people were like, okay, one, this isn't being funded enough, and two, these are like self-proclaimed studies. And then they finally got independent research. We started to see more, more things coming out. They couldn't market in certain ways, and really tried to curb some of the addictive, at least marketing that they were going to.
Yeah.
And right now, that's just not happening. When you think about everything that you just mentioned, Steve, from no windows, the temperature, free drinks, all of that is studied and researched. And I mean, large amounts of money are put into that. If all we got on the responsible gaming and problem gambling side was that same amount that they put into that research, we would, be able to start making an impact, and make
Yeah.
some real change. And that is where the problem lies, is they're incentivized to only give so much, which is why I'm worried, about their commitment to actually fixing the problem, because they are making tons of money. An extra $1 million to them to give to problem gambling would mean nothing, in their bottom line. Maybe the Bellagio only has 17 different light changes, in a show instead of 16. And so that's why this problem exists, is because nobody is able to punch the big casino, big sports book, big
Yeah.
lotto, in the mouth. And every state official right now, every single one of them is looking for ways to increase their tax base without increasing taxes. And so because of that, you now have gambling
Mhm.
as the bosom buddy of every, elected official. And here in the state of Indiana, they're talking about putting in one of the largest casinos outside of Vegas, right here in Indiana. And that, I mean, would just be crippling
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons.
I know that there was I I don't know if you know, I lived in Indiana for a number of years, and I know that the casinos down by the boats down towards Ohio there, I can't even think of the names of them.
Yeah,
But
Richmond.
there was money that was used that went to each town depending on how close you were to the casino. And there was grant money that was available that came from the casinos
Mhm.
for that. So again, it's a pittance out of their pocket, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things that just make them look better.
Well,
That's how
and
I
it's
looked at it.
the biggest problem is there's also not a lot of people that are focusing on this industry space. And I don't want to sell those that are short. They are amazing people. I
Hmm.
love working with them on a day-to-day basis, and they are real heroes and champions for what they're doing. But there isn't enough of them in this space yet, to
Mhm.
really put up the dukes and put a good fight together. So a lot of our efforts now are focused on research, putting together paper, documents, grant writings, proposals. Michelle Malkin is doing amazing work looking at
Yeah.
addictive behaviors at the college level. And we've got research coming out that, and I'm not saying, hey, if you're out of college, let's forget about you. But if we can start in high school and college and really put some concerted efforts and take that generation and give them a fighting chance,
Yeah.
that's just massive. And so, I mean, you've got certification programs like Jody Bettold, who's putting
Yeah.
together, trying to get people certified, from clinicians to peer
Mhm.
recovery support
Yeah.
specialists, and have it be universal so every state can accept it. And so these people at these casinos, while I do want to place blame and also say shame on them, they also aren't being asked for enough or for the right things, because
Yeah.
these other folks who are lifting problem gambling on their shoulders are only one person. They can only do so much. So, while I want to put blame and say that the casinos and sports books could do better, and they can, we need some folks out there to put their shoulders in and prop some of this up, so the folks that have been doing the heavy lifting can take a breath. So I want to encourage everybody listening. It's just as simple as putting a social media post out there or just telling people you love them. All of this makes a huge, huge difference. And so, I think that's important as well when we're talking about this is, it is the casino's fault and they have some blame for it. But if we could get more people aware of how much this impacts them on a day-to-day basis, I think we could get some more pillars up there because we've got some great folks doing some really great things.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's that point of the show where
It's the lightning round.
it's the lightning round. So we have pre-told Jeff that we're going to do this. So I didn't want to scare him. Okay, when it's like, oh my God, now what are they doing to me? Okay, we're the lightning round. But for those that aren't familiar, the listeners, during the lightning round, I'm going to ask Jeff 10 questions. Jeff will respond in either 1 or 2 word answers, or maybe a short response. Sometimes you can't answer in 1 or 2 words, but they'll come one after another. So there's no pressure. So,
Let's go.
so let's begin. Okay. Uh, one word that describes your lowest point.
Just shame. I mean, it was shame and embarrassment. I mean, and hopelessness. I know that's a couple, but it was very, very dark.
Okay, one word that describes your life today.
Driven.
The hardest emotion that you had to face during recovery.
Uh, um, self-worth. I know that might not be an emotion, but one of the hardest parts is building back that self-worth. Because if you can't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. So,
That's a good answer. The most dangerous thought an addict can have.
I mean, the amount of addicts that I talk to that think about taking their own life or that they're not worth being here anymore is the saddest thing to me. And I just that's the worst thing. The worst thought that an addict has is that one right there.
Here you go, Eric. This is the point of the show. Go ahead.
Okay.
If someone's thinking about suicide,
If someone's thinking about suicide, they need to pick up the phone and dial 988 right now.
yep.
So
Wait, for you know, Jeff, every show that 988 comes up. And
always.
it's an important number, and we really always want to talk about it whenever we get the opportunity to. Okay, up number 5, a boundary every person in recovery must set.
Wow. Every person in recovery, a boundary they must set. I would say your own personal limits. I think that boundary, just understanding where your stakes, should be placed. So if you hit those stakes to ask for help, I think those are the most important boundaries to put in, are the ones that protect you.
Now, during the time we were in jail, what's the best advice you received after you left prison?
While are you saying while I was in or after I left?
After you get out. Well, you can get both if you want.
Yeah.
We can do a 5A and B, okay?
Yeah, I think my wife, when I got in the car after she picked me up and said, "If you ever go back there again, I'm gonna murder you," was the best advice to stay out of prison. And I know that this is a little bit longer, but talk to someone. Whether you are an addict for problem gambling or alcohol, or you're thinking about hurting yourself, just talk to someone. And if you can't, send a message to either of these two guys or find me and I'll listen. There is people out there, so just talk.
You may have answered this one, but number 7, the moment you felt hope for the first time.
Oof. Boy, that's a real tough one. One of the things that prison takes away from you is hope. And so yes, I don't it's not I don't know if I have as much hopefulness, as I did before but yeah, I think just waking up and being humble and just doing what's in front of me, I think is what gives me hope, that I can get through the day.
I think you had answered before indirectly that question when you said when you were arrested and you were sitting in jail and you realized as finally was all coming out.
Mhm.
And that's got to be a
Yeah.
sign once you let go that there's hope that things are only going to get better starting
Yeah.
tomorrow. At least that's over. And now we move to another phase.
Well, and this is a very common prison term, but it's extremely important. It's this too shall pass, and it's
Mhm.
something that we all talk about while we're in, and prison really is a very cooperative, environment, and so everybody was always trying to figure out when we got out how to be a little bit better, and how to get better, and so just always remembering that whatever you're in, this will pass if you just stop and take a breath and talk to others around you.
Number 8, and we see this even in the news today. What's a misconception people have about financial crimes?
Um, well, I don't know if it's necessarily just financial crimes, but the one of the craziest things is when you tell someone you're a federal felon, they think that you murdered someone. There isn't a difference between financial crimes or, murder and things like that. Whereas, the people that I was in with, and the folks that I was around are some of the wealthiest and most to-do, people. Like some of the people I was in with, if before they went into prison, you were saying I'm meeting with these people would be like, "Oh, like you're in some
You're
big circle.
somebody.
Like you're
Yeah.
yeah, you're like a big to do." So yeah, I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions is that everybody is, a murderer or something like
Yeah.
that where we all have done something. We all needed to serve our time and then we get out, which is, the only way you can look at it if you want to try to
Yeah.
rehabilitate people that you send to prison.
I guess after you said that, if you just said, well, I was a politician once, they would just understand that just let it go.
Yeah, yeah. And there were a lot of politicians that were in there.
Oh
I'm
man.
sure there were. One thing
Yeah.
you wish families of addicts understood.
Oh, this is without a doubt. It is not your fault. Family members of addicts, it's so easy to take blame and try to, figure out what they could have done differently or, what happened in the moment. And it's just an unfortunate side effect that is very difficult when you're the addict, watching someone hurt and knowing that that had nothing to do with them in no way, shape, or form did it. But most family members feel that guilt and wish they could have done something, out of love, compassion, and empathy, which is why they're great family members. But that would be the one thing is it's not your fault. Don't carry that blame and that weight. You don't need to carry that. You guys got enough going on trying to get help, in all the other
Right.
areas.
The last question, and I know you went through a lot, but one thing you're most proud of today.
Um, You know, I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is that I have an opportunity at life again, whether that's a great one or a mediocre one. But I have an opportunity at life again, and I am grateful for that, and I am proud, that that's available to me. As there's a lot of people in my shoes, people that I was in with that they'll never have an opportunity again. They'll have to kind of either go back to their old ways to try to make some money or, figure out ways to just get by for the rest of their lives.
Okay, we get a couple of final questions. I'll let Dr. Davis start with the
All
first
right.
one. That's
All right, Jeff. How has helping others become a part of your own healing?
Yeah, it's, sharing your story. Essentially, you go through this massive swing. You have this shame, you're in this shame spiral, you're embarrassed about everything that you did. And then when you come out to the other side of it and you start working on healing yourself, you're able to share that story. And so for me, that is one of the biggest components is that by sharing my story, it helps me stay away from some of those shame spirals, and helps me from that perspective. I also think it's humbling to just talk to others. We all have relapses, we all make mistakes. There's nobody. I'm not saying that everybody that's an addict should think that they're going to relapse at some point, but statistically speaking, it's a high probability. So, just also being able to talk about those things. So if a relapse is something that's happening for me, or, those types of conversations allow me to potentially get back on track and, have some other detailed conversations like that. So it's just being around others that are affected and hearing their story and
Mhm.
just opening up space for them, and vice versa is why I think it's so helpful.
Final
What would you
question for you.
say? Well, hold on, before you do
Okay.
that one, what would you say to someone who's trapped in a gambling addiction and is trying to keep it quiet and hidden from people, but they also feel too ashamed to ask for help? What would you say to them right now?
Yeah. This is literally my biggest focus in my life right now is being able to answer that question, because that is where every problem gambler is at, that exact trap feeling. And if we could answer that question, boy, we could unlock a lot. But I always my always answer is you just have to tell somebody. Like, if you need to go to a Chili's, you know what I mean, or a White Castle, and just go up and say, hey, listen, I'm going to order 4 cheeseburgers and I just gambled $25,000. That's it. Like, I know how foolish that sounds, but once you tell one person, even a stranger, even someone that you don't talk about, you feel this. I can't even explain it. It's not so much a weight, but you feel this just sense of, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad if I tell someone else. So I always say try to find someone when you can, and just tell someone. And it doesn't have to be the most important person. It just trying to talk to someone is extremely important. And to steal something that Dr. Davis used to tell me, they now have, because of COVID, a lot of online GA meetings that you can attend, and you can literally sign in, put your microphone on mute, and you can put your screen on blackout as well. So go to a meeting and don't even say a word. Just
Yeah.
go
And
there
you can
and
say
just
your
listen
name's
to other.
Bill. Nobody
Yeah.
knows the difference.
Exactly. You can
Mhm.
make up a name and that sort of stuff. So I know when I'm at my worst, it's that I'm not telling anybody. When I had my issues, I just wouldn't tell anybody. And so to answer that question, I would just suggest them find me. You can do a Google search. You can see me. Send Dr. Davis a message. Like, seriously, like, I know it sounds foolish, but we don't know you. Just send a message and start a conversation.
Mhm.
Um, and know that there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it at all, and that it's an actual addiction. I think this is the other issue, is that people, because of how we talk about gambling, most humans on this earth do not think gambling is a problem or an addiction. That is a fact. It just got put in the DSM-5 maybe
Mhm.
2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like, it hasn't been that long as an actual addiction. So there's this stigma, like you were talking about earlier, Dr. Davis, that you shouldn't even be having a problem,
Mhm.
and that's just not the case. If you had cancer, you would go to the doctor and ask for help. If you
Yeah,
had, a broken foot, you would go to the doctor and ask for help.
absolutely.
And by no means am I comparing this to cancer. I'm just saying
Right.
it's an
Mhm.
illness, that's impacting you,
Absolutely.
and so you would go see someone. And I also, not to plug someone, but there's also these financial resources through programs like GamFin that
Mhm.
exist, where you can ask questions and actually be in group sessions about finances and not even have to talk about problem gambling, not even have to admit that you're an addict. You can just get resources. So even if you're not comfortable with even saying out loud that you're an addict, because
Mhm.
holy cow, that is a difficult day as well.
Yeah.
But even if you're not, there's resources that exist that you can just get information. There's assessments out there, that you can take. And so I would say that, and then just know you're not alone. In no way, shape, or form are you not alone. We're here for you, and there's people that have been in your situation,
Absolutely.
and have come out at the other end. And that, I think, is the one thing that I can share with everybody. I was sentenced to 24 months in federal prison and 12 months of home confinement, for what I did. And I can go through all of that. I'm able to find employment. There is hope for everybody. And I know I said earlier that I'm not a big fan of hope, but I think when you're in addiction throes, sometimes you got to just know that there is some success out there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, he actually seemed to have answered the last question you were going to ask.
Yeah, sorry, that's
Just
why I was
there, which
looking at
is
you.
fine. Okay. Well, Jeff, your honesty, vulnerability today has been incredibly powerful. You may not realize it, but let's take it a step further away. There's the three steps here. Me just being the host of Evil with some psychology background, it is so um it's a powerful thing because you one of the things we try to impress on the show is that mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of.
Mhm.
And like you said, the word addiction has been so overused by Hollywood and everything else that people don't understand anymore what addiction is. We talked about it earlier. People say, well, why does he just stop? Well, if he could stop, then he wouldn't have an addiction. I mean, people don't, I don't want to say people don't think anymore, but they don't think it through
Right.
anymore. And of course, it's what we've been fed. Same way growing up, it's what we've been fed. I found your story powerful because when I first researched the story, and we have never spoken before, like 10 minutes before we went on to this interview. So just so people know he knows Dr. Davis, but he didn't know me. And I find your story completely powerful. How you've turned a real negative that took place into something that's a true positive. And I got to give you credit for that. And I really thank you for sharing not just your pain, but the hope that people have that if they, you know, hell, we used the word earlier, so I'll say it again. Shit happens.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
It happened already. So, you know, let's get past it
Yeah.
and show how we can make the rest of our life that much better. So, Jeff, I thank you again for everything that you brought to the table here, for being so open to us and open to the people. And I wish you continued success in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve. I just want to add one thing. We focus a
Sure.
lot on the proudness and, things like that. And I want to make sure that folks also understand that I have relapses. I have bad days. I have moments where I am incapable of moving, and so even people that are living life in recovery, those people that have 20 years, sobriety, I just want to make sure people know that we still stumble, we still fall, we still make mistakes. And even when we're at our best, we still have to put those boundaries up. So,
Absolutely.
just to make sure that folks know that just because I'm doing well doesn't mean every day is well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And easy. So those folks that maybe have relapsed or have fallen back into bad habits, the sooner you start talking to someone,
Yes.
the sooner, we can have conversations. The sooner you can get back to feeling the way that you want to. So again, I'm not trying to bring a negative note. Relapses are just so common and are so hard when you go through them. That I just want to remind people that even all of us, every day, we're one day closer, to relapsing, just like anybody else is. So,
Yeah.
so just
So
know
one
how.
of the sayings I've heard like in 12-step fellowships a lot is they'll say, somebody may be further from the last one than somebody else, but no one's further from the next one than anybody else. I mean,
Yep.
it really, it's a daily battle. It's doable. We have to remain as vigilant as we can. What Jeff's saying is don't ever expect that every person is always going to work a perfect program. And if you do stumble, keep hanging on. Don't give up. If you do stumble, it's not the end. You know, Seek the help. And there are so many resources, like Jeff was saying, that are available to, I know here in Indiana, there's even funding that will help individuals who need treatment pay for it. So, I mean, that's amazing. That is such an amazing opportunity. Um, so if you're struggling and you're thinking about getting treatment, give us or a provider in your area a call, because there are probably tons of resources that you aren't aware of. And Jeff and I can both vouch for there are tons in Indiana. So if you live in Indiana, give us a call.
And
Yep.
even if you
And
don't, remember for them the commercials with Way Post Counseling, you could do it online.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
yeah.
So
So I'm a certified peer recovery coach, and I help people all over the country. You guys are more than welcome. I know, Dr. Davis, you have my treatment number.
Absolutely.
Please feel free to share that with anybody. Put it in the podcast, whatever you need to do. Anybody that just needs to send a message or anything, let me know. If you're outside of Indiana, that's fine as well. We can chat and figure out if there's any resources, available for you in that area. And if nothing else, you'll just have someone that can listen and say hello. So yeah, I just want to offer that up to anybody that's listening that may need help.
Remember,
Thank you so
if
much.
you're an addict, have any kind of addiction, there's no sin, people are going to look at you terribly for seeking out help. Actually, you're going to find that if you did seek out help and you got yourself help, that people are going to look at you really proud that you took that first step. It may not seem like it when you're an addict, but it really is something important. And remember, and all I kept thinking of, Jeff, when you're talking about the relapse stuff and wanting, to gamble like every other day, I take something that's so minimal compared to that. I was a smoker for like 20 something years.
Oh,
Okay, I
same
haven't
type of
smoked
thing,
now
yeah.
in like 15 years at least. But let me tell you, I'll be driving in my car, and just on the highway,
Yeah.
and a car will pass me by on the right, and the person will be smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
Been like 15 years, but there's still that.
Oh, yeah. It's
Ooh,
normal to think, boy, a
I'd like to
cigarette
have
would
one
be
of
great
those.
right now, but we don't have to smoke one.
Yeah,
I mean, and
exactly.
it's okay to have those thoughts. It doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong. It's not a moral failing. That is the disease of addiction and how it affects us in our brain.
Now, the only reason I brought that up is because that's maybe something that more people can relate to. More people have had smoking addiction than probably a lot of the other addictions. So I want them to realize how, if it's that powerful on something as small as cigarette smoking, but again, that's mental and chemical addictive things. The same way with whether it's a drug addict, whether it's a gambling addict, anyone has the same problems down the line. So, but Jeff, thank you for taking the time out of your morning and stuff to be with us today.
You're absolutely
And
amazing, man. Thank you so
yeah,
much. Seriously, Jeff.
and we may be tapping
You're
you in the
awesome.
future to come back on also. So,
Yeah, I just thank you guys for what you guys do. We need resources and we just need voices and people sharing stories. So thank you guys for having me. Always love to be back on, and just hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.
All right. Thank you so much,
thanks,
Jeff.
Jeff. Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
So it was a pleasure having Jeff join us this evening on the show. I could clearly see how he is a great asset to the gambling problem in general, how he's helping other people. It's fantastic because he brings a unique perspective that maybe a counselor can't if they've never had a gambling issue.
Yeah, very much so. Remember, if you or someone you know has a serious gambling or mental health issue, you can call us at Waypost Counseling at 317-762-0904. You can meet with a specialist right from the privacy of your own home. All you need is a reliable internet connection.
Now, to anyone listening who sees some of their own struggle in Jeff's story, remember you're not alone. Addiction is treatable, recovery is possible, and your future, your life, and your story truly matter. So if you like this episode, please click the like button, subscribe, leave us a comment, and you can even share, the thing to someone who you might know need help. Maybe you can even share it to a group, that deals with gambling. Share it on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, by email, anywhere you know someone that might need help. Remember, you can visit us on the web at the YourLifeMattersPodcast.com. There's a link there to purchase official Your Life Matters podcast gear and accessories as well. So thank you for sharing this time with us. Hold on to one another. Hold on to hope. And as always, please never forget that your life matters. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next Thursday for another great episode with your hosts, Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Please remember to subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so, and hit the like button and leave a comment. Your help with this helps us reach a wider audience that may need our help.